Hello and welcome to WION Live, broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. After unexplained leaks in the Baltic Sea, the Kremlin and Germany say they're not ruling out sabotage as a reason behind damage to the Nord Stream pipeline. Calling for radical policies to revive growth, the World Trade Organization chief says the world could be heading towards a global recession due to multiple colliding crises. The Asian Development Bank will provide $14 billion in loans over 4 years to help poorer countries improve food security as prices soar and climate change bites. Hurricane Ian makes landfall in western Cuba. The storm is set to strengthen and head towards the west coast of Florida. A Spanish court orders Colombian music superstar Shakira to stand trial in a tax fraud case. Prosecutors will seek a prison sentence of over 8 years and a fine of nearly $24 million.
Music superstar Shakira.
It's the final day of voting in referendums in Ukraine, which the West says are illegal and a sham. 4 Russian-held regions are involved in the votes about whether to become part of Russia. Polling stations have been set up in Donetsk, Lugansk, and parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson. This makes up around 15% of Ukraine's territory. It's widely expected the referendums will deliver a majority in favour, but the West is clear that the votes are not free or fair or credible. Moscow calls it a reunification, the West an annexation. Very few countries are expected to recognise the results. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has warned that an annexation will destroy any chance of peace talks. In 2014, Moscow held a similar referendum in Crimea, in an annexation also not recognised by the West. Thousands of Russian men, meanwhile, are fleeing to neighbouring countries to avoid being called up to fight in the war in Ukraine. A miles-long line persists along the Russia-Georgia border.
The protests and the apparent exodus of fighting-age men from Russia following the call-up of hundreds of thousands of military reservists for the war in Ukraine is still going. And in one of the countries where they're fleeing, neighboring Georgia, Reuters met several opposing that order. Some who had just arrived and others already here, including a family, one among 40,000 Russians that Georgian authorities say have come to their capital alone since the invasion began. Dmitry Kurylyunok, a father, Ivan Streltsov, an army reservist, and a man named Maxim, who didn't give his last name.
We're completely against this war, and we call it for what it is. It's not an operation, it's a war. When we found out about the mobilization, we dropped everything at home and jumped in the car. Russia is being fragmented and destroyed by corruption, lawlessness, suspension of all rights and freedoms, and suspension of views.
I took part in protests when the military operation started. For us as citizen activists, things have become very difficult at this moment in our own motherland. We're all being watched.
All
of this has pulled us back. Pulled us back from growth, from progress, from unity. It's pulled us back, for example, from fighting for ideals like climate change and world hunger. For me, this is a huge tragedy.
It's very scary. I worry about my friends. I'm trying to help my friends to get somewhere else. It's horrible, and I am going to cry now.
The situation here in Georgia for these Russians is somewhat complicated. The wave of new arrivals in Georgia is threatening to reignite anti-Russian feelings here. Pro-Ukraine messages are plastered everywhere in the city. Some graffiti even says Russians go home. Apartment prices have also skyrocketed in the last 6 months. At one point on Sunday, the wait time at the border to enter Georgia hit 48 hours, according to Russian state media, who cited local officials. And there are similar scenes playing out in Kazakhstan, Finland, and Mongolia.
The Bank of England says it will not hesitate to hike interest rates further to curb inflation. That came hours after the pound hit its record low against the US dollar. The pound's value dropped after the UK's new Chancellor announced a tax-cutting mini-budget last Friday. He then, Kwasi Kwarteng, pledged further tax cuts over the weekend. The UK's radical financial policy is in contrast with the rest of the world's major economies, and it comes at the time of a worsening cost of living crisis. So what does a weak pound mean, and how will it impact the lives of Britons? Well, WION's business editor Sumit Chaturvedi is joining me live now. And Sumit, first of all, for the ordinary Brit at home watching the pound on international markets, why is a weak pound against the dollar of particular concern?
Well, Ollie, the biggest problem global economies are facing is of high inflation. There are two ways of handling it. First of all, to raise interest rates, but at the same time, raising interest rates have a negative impact on economy as well. It depresses the economy. That's why it is not favored by many economists as well. The second is by stabilizing currency. Well, currently, that is the need of the hour. Stabilizing of currency is required. As we know that in UK, pound has plunged to a record low yesterday. It's almost coming closer to at parity with the dollar. Well, that's not a good news for Britons because, first of all, the winter is coming as they all depend a lot on gas. Gas is in short supply now because of Russia-Ukraine war. The prices are rising there. It's imported. That's what is going to be the biggest expenditure as far as Britons are concerned, and it's going to be costlier. The second thing, there are direct and indirect imports that happen, and that leads to, we can say that, some sort of expensive living for all of them. Direct imports, will that include oil, gold, mobile phones, even cars, imported cars. They all are going to be expensive because the pound is plunging against dollar. Remember, UK is a trade deficit. It has a trade deficit with many economies. So it clearly doesn't, the exports, the value in rise of export doesn't justify the increase in imports and the value of imports. So it is in a loss as far as overall trade balance is concerned. For Britons, clearly it's going to raise the cost of imported things from fertilizer to food as well. So it's going to be to make life difficult for a common British citizen, especially when the winter is coming. Oil and gas are going to get costlier. The other way is government should take some steps so that pound, well, it's clearly come in a comfortable zone with dollar, and that's the only way Britons can live we can say the comfortable life.
Okay, Sumit, thank you. Well, as the pound hit that record low against the dollar on Monday, it's good news for some people here in the UK. For tourists, for example, a good opportunity to seek more value for their money or just to spend more while they're here.
Yeah, of course, like during this time you can spend money on purchasing things because it's a good time to do it. Because we're not earning, pounds.
As you're telling me this, I'm thinking, what does that mean for me now? And some of the fun things, I was just at Covent Garden and walking along the shops there and deliberately not going in some places. Maybe I'll go back.
It's a big difference. When you get more bang for your buck, it makes people want to travel more. And that's the thing, And like if you go to America, a place like that, it's a lot dearer. Like you come into England now, it's crashed. I think you'll find people will, want to travel more over here.
The leader of the UK's main opposition party is vowing to reverse a tax cut for top earners announced by the Conservative government last week. The Labour Party is holding its annual conference in Liverpool this week. Leader Keir Starmer addressed his conference today. On the eve of his speech, his Labour Party has a record lead in the polls over the Conservatives. And so Labour Party members are upbeat.
Yes.
What about?
I do not think that the choice to have tax cuts for those that are earning hundreds of thousands of pounds is the right choice when our economy is struggling the way it is, working people are struggling in the way they are, and our public services are on their knees. So it is the wrong choice. That is the wrong choice.
Japan has honoured its longest-serving Prime Minister Shinzo Abe with a rare state funeral. Abe's ashes were placed in the centre for guests to pay their tributes. It was followed by a guard of honour with 19 rounds of cannon fire. Around 20,000 police officers were deployed around the venue. Around 700 foreign guests were in attendance, including Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US Vice President Kamala Harris, and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. But there were protests too. State funerals are rare in Japan. Normally only the royal family receives the honour. And for more on this, our correspondent Richard Kimber reports now from Tokyo.
Well, Prime Minister Modi has spoken publicly, both on his social media and in interviews, about how strong his relationship with Shinzo Abe was. It really formed a crux of what was for Japan a means of trying to broaden its political ties beyond its own borders. This was a key policy of Shinzo Abe, is to try and increase Japan's clout on the international stage. And that extended, of course, to the US under former President Trump and to the United Kingdom. This, though, did rile many people in Japan. They saw this as an attempt not just to try and improve Japan's international standing, but also to increase its involvement in international military strategic affairs and pursue a brand of Japanese conservatism and nationalism that many people here in the country did not really believe in. And that's the big cause of concern with regards to this funeral. There have been protests taking place down the road as the funeral began from people who say this funeral was unjust, the idea of it is illegitimate, they say the cost of it is unacceptable, and principally they're concerned about what this represents in terms of Japan going forward if politicians such as Shinzo Abe are, in their words, lionized by these types of events.
While in Japan, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida. The Indian leader expressed his condolences for the death of Shinzo Abe, and the two leaders promised to take forward New Delhi and Tokyo's ties.
आबे-सान और उनके साथ आपने विदेश मंत्री के रूप में भी भारत और जापान के संबंधों को नई ऊंचाई पर भी ले गए और बहुत क्षेत्रों में उसका विस्तार भी किया और हमारी दोस्ती ने एक वैश्विक प्रभाव पैदा करने में भी बहुत बड़ी भूमिका निभाई भारत और जापान की दोस्ती ने.
Well, they also called for a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific and a renewal of the commitment towards a global partnership.
आपके नेतृत्व में भारत जापान संबंध और अधिक गहरे होंगे और अधिक ऊंचाइयों को पार करेंगे और हम विश्व में समस्याओं के समाधान में एक उचित भूमिका निभाने के लिए समर्थ बनेंगे, ऐसा मेरा पूरा विश्वास है.
It's the third in-person meeting between Modi and Kishida. This year marks the 70th anniversary of India-Japan ties, and Tokyo is seen as one of New Delhi's closest allies. Well, for more on this, WION's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal reports.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a day-long visit to Japan to attend the funeral ceremony of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Now, earlier today, he had a bilateral with the current Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, in which he personally extended his condolences. But of course, both sides recalled the role played by Shinzo Abe in terms of strengthening India-Japan relationship. We know that when it comes to Shinzo Abe's outreach to India and New Delhi, this is something that is remembered. He, of course, played a pivotal role in terms of making sure that Tokyo-New Delhi relationship reaches a new elevation. He, of course, is seen as someone who not only strongly backed the Indo-Pacific concept, but also the Quad as well. He, in fact, is seen as someone who strengthened the Quad and made sure that today, whatever the Quad is doing is because essentially a brainchild of the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Later in the day, we will see more visuals of the Indian Prime Minister attending the funeral ceremony, and he is going to meet the wife of Shinzo Abe as well. This is a very short visit, roughly around 12 to 16 hours, almost 5 hours to just reach Japan. But the Indian Prime Minister made sure that he goes there, given the close personal relationship he shared with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. We know that earlier this year, when his assassination took place, the Indian Prime Minister was among the first to extend condolences. He wrote a blog about his personal relationship, and India also announced a day-long mourning with the flags at half-mast. Siddhant Sibal for WION in New Delhi.
Sri Lanka is staring at a major power outage. A key power plant has shut down unexpectedly. A senior officials blamed poor quality crude oil imports for the incident. The plant says oil burnt in furnaces had too much sulphur in it. Sri Lanka is already witnessing daily power outages lasting anywhere between 80 and 140 minutes. WION's Colombo correspondent Dasuni Atauda reports now.
The island nation is once again staring down at a possible major power crisis, given that one of Sri Lanka's main power plants, the Norotchole power plant, is currently mainly inactive due to 2 generators not in operation. Now, this also comes at a time where Sri Lanka's PUCSL chairman made statements that the oil that was imported for electricity generation are of substandard use. Now, these comments did spark some controversy, provided that Sri Lanka's energy minister did say that he will be taking legal action against these statements made, refuting that the oil that was imported into the country are of substandard use. Stay with WION as we update the very latest here from Colombo. Reporting for WION World is One, I'm Dasuni Atauda.
Brazil goes to the polls on October the 2nd. Brazil's leftist presidential candidate Lula da Silva says he can win the elections in the first round. He's been speaking at his final campaign event in Sao Paulo.
I work with the expectation we will decide this election on October 2nd. I work with this expectation. I want this. If it doesn't happen, we will go to the second round because the Workers' Party has a long experience in second rounds.
He's pledging to work until the day of the elections to attract voters who appreciate democracy. Artists, celebrities and other international personalities attended Lula's rally in Sao Paulo. He currently leads the opinion polls by a 17-point margin against President Jair Bolsonaro. The latest IPEC survey suggests Lula has the support of 48% of voters. Bolsonaro is at 31%. If the polls are right, Lula could win the presidential race in that first round. Bridget Kosgei will not be at this year's London Marathon. She's pulled out of the race after a hamstring injury.
Kenya's world record-holding marathon runner Bridget Kosgei has been forced to withdraw from the London Marathon, which takes place this coming Sunday. Kosgei, who won the London Marathon in 2019 and 2020, said in a statement that she'd been struggling over the past month with an issue in the hamstring of her right leg. She'd been one of the favourites going into the event, having won the Tokyo Marathon earlier this year as well as a silver medal at last year's Olympics. In 2019, she set a world record time of 2 hours, 14 minutes and 4 seconds in Chicago. Kosgei said she would be getting further treatment in order to enter the 2023 marathon stronger than ever.
And finally, 3 rock climbers have made history as the first all-women team to conquer Route Riu in Spain. The climbers scaled a 610-metre rock wall to enter the record books. I'll leave you with that story. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.